Good evening and welcome again to week 2, the stakeholder chapter, the stakeholder analysis. This is the first of about 10 sessions that we're going to have. They will all be recorded, but if you are on time, and a lot of times there you might not be quite on the right chapter through no fault of your own, but if you are on time, then this can be helpful because you will be able to ask questions. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, here is the agenda that we have. We're going to first talk about the 3 sections of the chapter: the stakeholder models, stakeholder analysis, and yes, there is a difference, and the stakeholder meeting. And then we're going to do a little discussion of what the overall structure should be of chapters. And we're going to end up with some questions, or allowing you to have some questions. And I usually do continue recording through most of the questions because people do appreciate other people's questions. Okay, so the first section that you're going to have in your chapter is a section on stakeholder models. And the stakeholder models identify those stakeholders that are essential for your project. It's those people who are affected by your project or who can affect your project. That's not every stakeholder that is in the that affects the organization. It's only those that affect your particular project. It's also not just the stakeholders that you meet with, because there are likely to be a number of other stakeholders that are important. So what should your stakeholders chapter look like? Well, first, it should be thorough. Even though it's only those who are affected by your project, it should still be thorough. Now, this is a very thorough one. You can use it as kind of I'll say a model, a stakeholder model, but obviously you're not going to have all of these, but it might give you some ideas of the kinds of stakeholders that you have. It should also be graphical. You're going to describe what a stakeholder model is, then you're going to show the stakeholder model for your organization and the project, and then you're going to do a bit of analysis of it. So that the analysis will include a description of each stakeholder, and I'll get to that in a couple of minutes. So there are a number of different ways you can organize. One of the things that you use stakeholder models for is to give you an instant picture of what the most important interrelationships are in the stakeholder model. So just having a plain stakeholder model like this one, which is just round, doesn't really identify, which ones might be more important, which ones might be closer. There are a lot of different ways that you can organize this. So you can organize it in a functional way. This one is done with governance and management, operations and supply chain, and products and packaging. Or you can organize it in internal versus external. This particular one shows the internal influencers, let me see, and the internal business partners, and then the external, the customer groups, and the external influencers. Just happens to be how this person organized it. But something that, and you will see when you go and maybe Google stakeholder models and take a look at what are some samples, you'll see a number of different ones that kind of look like this, internal versus external. And you're welcome to model your model on those. You can also do primary versus secondary. So which ones are the ones that are most important to the success of your project which are the ones that might be influenced by your project or affected by your project, but aren't really that critical. Or you can do one that is theoretically based. And when you're, so you can see this one is theoretically based on the triple bottom line. And again, there are a lot of different ways, different theories that you can use that you can base it on. You can base it on systems theory, input, process, output, and feedback. A lot of different ways. Before I get into stakeholder analysis, I want to say one other thing here, and I'll probably repeat it later as well. The stakeholder model, the first thing that you do with all of your sections is you describe what the tool is. Then you show the tool applied to your project, and then you analyze the tool. Now, in this case, when you're analyzing the tool, what you are doing is talking about each stakeholder that is there. So you might have one that has the employees. And so you would have a bullet or a subheading that says employees. And you describe who the employees are and how they can be affected by the project or how they can affect the project. Just a couple of sentences for each stakeholder. But, you know, the manager, the owner, the employees, the customers, whoever it is there, you describe, you give a little subheading for each one, and then you give a couple of sentences, not too long, a couple of sentences that, that describe their relationship within the stakeholder model. Then you're going to go a little bit deeper and do a stakeholder analysis. And again, if you Google stakeholder model and then Google stakeholder analysis, by and large, they look different. The stakeholder models show a relationship of the stakeholders maybe to the organization. The stakeholder analysis shows those stakeholders based upon some criteria. And we've done both of these in class. So here's one example. This one is importance versus influence. And there's the importance of the stakeholder and the influence of the stakeholder. So those that have significant influence and significant importance would be over in this quadrant. And again, you describe what a stakeholder analysis is, then you display this with all the stakeholders in the right places, and then you kind of summarize or analyze, you know, what the effect is or what you need to do because of the stakeholders being where they are. For example, this one is another one that's very good. It's called power versus interest. So the other is influence. This one is power. It doesn't, well, it matters in the sense that you want to pick the one that's most appropriate for you, but you could do this particular graphical display, whether you use influence or interest. The nice thing about this one is that it also gives you in the quadrant what you need to do with the particular kinds of stakeholders. So there's low versus high in terms of interest, and there's low versus high in terms of power. Those people who are high interest and high power, you need to manage closely. Those that are high interest, high power, but low interest, you need to keep satisfied. And we'll, like, for example, you might have a government entity. Government entity has high power, but they really don't care very much about what you're doing. So you want to just keep them satisfied. Whereas the manager or the owner might be a very high, well, certainly high power, and might have a very high interest in what you're doing, especially if it has financial implications. And so this says manage closely. You can modify these, adapt these for your use. I'm not sure I would want to say I'm managing the owner if if the owner is going to be reading this. So you can say work closely or coordinate closely or something along those lines. Those that have high interest but low power might want to keep informed. Those that are low, again, I'm not sure I would say minimum effort, because if that person reads this, they might be insulted. But you do want to monitor, make sure that they don't move into one of the other groups without your awareness. Something like employees and customers might actually kind of fall in the middle. The other thing that's really nice in this is that you can put the different stakeholders, the ones that are the most powerful and the most interested, can be closest to the upper corner. And so those that are in the middle, you can put in the middle. Now, you will also notice that this particular one uses names. Do not use names. The reason that you don't want to use names is twofold. Number one is you'd have to ask all of their permission to use their names. And then you'd have to be very careful about, what you're saying, which you probably should be anyway, but, you always want to be polite. But the other thing is that people come and go. And if there's turnover and one of these people leaves, then all of a sudden your paper is dated. So don't put names down. Use functions, like department chair or employees or facilities planner, facilities manager, something like that. This is a different kind of analysis. It's called a position analysis, and it has the list of the stakeholders and what their current position is. Are they supportive? Do they resist? Are they neutral? And then maybe the reasons for that current position, and then what you need. Now, you probably don't want to have anybody that's resisting, but it is possible that some of them could be neutral. Now, if you use this one, I'm using this because this is what would be in the readings that you may have copied from 4781, 4783, or you might find online. There is an area for your action plan and mitigation strategy. However, that's going to be in a later chapter. So don't put it here because you don't want to be duplicative. If you put it here, I'm going to tell you probably that you'll need to move it. You'll have it done, but you'll need to use it later. So if you're going to use this particular position analysis, and you only need one analysis, you don't need multiples. You have one stakeholder model, one analysis type of analysis that it goes deeper. And then this is another one. It's an impact analysis, and it shows all of the stakeholders and how much impact that they have. So how would you determine the numbers? Well, if you work, if this is your workplace, you might have a fairly good sense already. But if this is, if you have the opportunity to work with a key stakeholder, your key stakeholder will tell you very quickly what the impact of each one of these stakeholders is. And so that is part 2. So part 1 was the stakeholder model. Part 2 is the stakeholder analysis. Part 3 is your stakeholder meeting. And this is where you are going to write down, summarize what your stakeholder meeting is that you're going to have early this week, or you may have already had it. But if you haven't gotten all of this information, you're going to want to have a meeting with them to make sure that all of this is covered. Now, this is the shortest of the 3 sections. It can be, and remember, everything is double spaced, APA, and this can be maybe half to 2/3 of a page. Don't make it 5 pages. It doesn't have to be minutes. You can write minutes, but if you write minutes, put them in the appendix. So this is what you're going to write about: that you met, that you explained what the process was, so they know that it's 16 weeks, that you have very specific timelines and you're going to need some help with them. You're going to discuss the sustainability issues and find out what their greatest need is, and then use that to clarify what your project is. Defining the scope, you may not use the whole building, you may only use a section, you may not use, 2 years of data if you only have 1 year of data. So, although that, you don't necessarily have to have at this point. And you can always redefine the scope, as I said last week, when you go through it. And a commitment to meet again. You will probably need to meet 2 or 3 more times during the project. One, when you do your audit, because somehow you're probably going to have to collect data from some of your key stakeholders, whether it's billing data or whether it's a facilities walkthrough. You'll have to do something like that. And then you'll also probably want to talk with them when you have recommendations, so that they can give you some direction on which recommendations are most likely to be successful. So that's your commitment to meet again. And then you summarize it. So those are the things that you want to be able to cover in your stakeholder meeting. The last section that we're going to talk about today is the overall structure of chapters. The first thing is that every chapter has an opening. This opening has, so you don't leap in right to the first tool. The chapter has the purpose. And frankly, I don't care if you say the purpose of this chapter is da 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 da. That's okay. You want to be more creative, that's fine too. But you want to definitely open the chapter with some kind of a purpose statement, because people want a roadmap of where they're going. And that is what the preview is also. So you have the purpose of this chapter is to define and describe the stakeholders that are affected by this project or that can affect this project. The chapter consists of, excuse me, a stakeholder model, a stakeholder analysis, a review of the stakeholder meeting. And again, the reason that you want to give them this preview, this outline, not an actual, ABC outline, but just a couple of sentences that describe what goes in the chapter, is because they're going to read through and they're going to read the stakeholder model, and then they're going to say, okay, that sounds good. And then you're going to do the stakeholder analysis. You're going, okay. Then you have the stakeholder meeting, and they're going, how many sections are in this chapter? So tell them to begin with. And that is the purpose of the chapter, and that is the preview. Then every week, I'm going to say there are 2 sections to this chapter. There are 3 sections to this chapter. So in this case, there are 3 sections: stakeholder model, stakeholder analysis, and stakeholder meeting. Please address all the sections. If you don't, that will be an automatic loss of a few points. So if you have a question about it, you can ask me during the week. That's absolutely fine. If you're missing too much, I may suggest that you would be better off waiting to be graded, and we can answer your questions, and then you can go back and do it, because I do want you to be successful. So make sure you're addressing all the sections that are covered in the overview and the template. Use headings to guide the eye, because again, people want to know where they are in the chapter. And so you say stakeholder model, and then description, model, stakeholders, because you're going to go through each stakeholder either in a bullet or a subheading and describe each stakeholder. So use headings to guide the eye so people know where they are. Because I will tell you frankly, what most people will do when they get your very long paper is they're going to flip through it, and they're going to focus on the pictures, the graphics, and they're going to focus on the headings and read those sections that are of interest to them first. So make it easy for them. And then be sure that you follow the e-portfolio structure that we practiced so much in the last couple of classes. And that is, you always start, each chapter is going to have 2 or 3 tools or 2 or 3 a theory that you'll be covering or something along those lines. And for each one, you're going to start and describe what the tool is or describe what the concept is. Then you're going to give some kind of visual that applies it to your particular project, whether it's a graphical model or whether it's a table or something along those lines, or a photograph in some cases. And then you're going to tell them what the meaning is of that particular. You're going to describe it. You're going to break it down. You're going to summarize it, something along those lines. So as you're going through, you have your opening, first tool, description, graphical analysis, second tool, description, graphic analysis, however many there are, and then closing. So that is the e-portfolio structure that we've been using all the way along. And then every chapter needs a closing. And this has a concluding paragraph of some kind that restates what you covered in this chapter. And so there's, it's maybe 2 or 3 sentences there that says, kind of restates a little bit about the opening, but now it has more meaning and you can add a little bit more meaning to it. And then you always want to finish with a transition sentence and how this information is going to be used in future chapters. So this and this is, as an example, particularly useful in stakeholders because so many times people would write their stakeholder chapter and then they'd never use it again. It was just, oh, well, that was an assignment, now I'm done. No, where is the stakeholder chapter going to be used in future chapters? And this is an iterative process. You may go back a little bit later in your process and say, oh gosh, I really made good use of the stakeholders here. So like, for instance, say stakeholders will be used when identifying the recommendations that meet the needs of the key stakeholders, things like that. And this is probably not a bad time to start your appendices. So if you have minutes, you can add your appendices at that time. I need that up a little bit. But at any rate, just be aware you want to do remember, you have to have your in-text citations. You can start your list of references and any other appendices like minutes or anything like that. Then you would already start collecting those so that it makes it much easier to assemble at the end. Oh, there we go. There's the list of references. So with that, I'm going to ask if you have any questions. Questions?
I think you actually did a really great description about all the different assignments. I mean, I'm good. I don't have any.
Well, thank you. Okay. Anybody else?
The only question which I have is with the stakeholder meeting, we should have it like next week at the beginning, right? In the beginning of the week. Yeah,
like tomorrow. Well, tomorrow a lot of places are closed, but to try to have it as early in the week as possible. Because it's going to help you write the rest of the chapter. It's going to help you with the project. It's because if you're not absolutely certain what the project is going to be, how can you identify who the stakeholders are that are most affected or that can affect the project? Now, if it's a small business, it might be easy. And if this is one of those real world things that happens. If you can't get a hold of the key stakeholder until the end of the week, you can do your best to lay out as much of the chapter as possible. And then when you have your meeting, you can go back and revise it a little bit. Those are some, you don't necessarily want to wait until until you have your stakeholder meeting, if the stakeholder meeting is late. It's also sometimes when it's like next week. I mean, really, the week 3 or week 4. Then you have to kind of decide whether you need to wait because you have no clue what project you're going to be doing. And that happened to somebody last semester. It was, she knew she was going to do something with B Corps, great student, but her key stakeholder was out of town for the first 2 weeks of class. And she eventually caught up, but I said, look, if you have to take an extra week or 2 at the end, that's okay. She was determined, but that was the real world can interfere, which is why I said last week when we had our kickoff meeting that try to make the appointment with your stakeholder as early in this week as possible. If you really wanted to get a head start, you could have watched last year's video, which I'll replace. But there's nothing really serious that changed, except I moved the structure up to this week. It was next week, and I'm going, well, why do I have it next week? Now I have to explain to everybody why, what the structure of the chapter should be. So that's the only change that I made this time. Any other questions?
In my situation, I had actually a preliminary with different key stakeholders already, but I may revise certain things simply because we will have follow-up meetings and some other things I may have to add. So absolutely, like I say, this is an iterative process, and a lot of people had initial meetings with their stakeholders just to make sure it was okay if you do the project there. And you may have already discussed some of these things, but they might not be aware of like the timeline that you need to, because that audit comes up fast. That's, weeks 4 and 5. So they may need time to gather up some of the data, and the sooner that they know some of the things that, and even you might not know what data you're going to need until, now that you know what the project is, you can look for the right checklist and do all those kinds of things. But as soon as you want to let them know, because they're very busy and sustainability is sadly not their highest priority. So you have to give them plenty of notice. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? If not, I'm going to go ahead and stop.
Hey, Professor.
Yes.
I just had one question.
Sure.
It came up when I was initiating my stakeholder, making sure that we could actually utilize the business.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked about privacy, of the paper. So is it going to be published anywhere besides the college, or?
That is, first of all, that's entirely up to you. And there are some places that will require a non-disclosure agreement to be signed. And if they feel more comfortable with you doing that, that's fine.
Okay.
When you do your final presentation, it is going to be using that business as an example, but you don't have to have a photograph of the business. You don't even have to necessarily identify it by name. You can just say it's a, shoe company in Tampa, or whatever it is. Obviously, a lot of businesses are very sensitive about any negative information coming out. Oh, they're not very sustainable, are they? So we want to reassure them that that's not going to be the case. Now, if at some point in time you may want to publish, because I have been encouraging students to publish their work, and we'll help you do that after you've graduated. And if that's the case, you will certainly want to take out the references to the specific business before you publish it. However, for chapter one's going to have an introduction to the company. And so you will have, some information about the company, and that can, the only person who reads this cover to cover is me and maybe your mom. even your key stakeholders probably won't read every page.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure because obviously that was just a question that was just brought up with
Mhm.
them. So I told her that obviously we would provide her the paper, like the final paper that she could
Mhm.
have if they ever wanted to utilize any of the information. But
Mhm.
as for just making it public, she just wanted to make sure that the company wouldn't be
Yeah,
like thrown.
and as I say, I had one student that worked for classified, an organization that worked for the military, and we had a non-disclosure agreement with them. And it was a great paper. I would have loved to have published it. But no, that was it's. I think it's a if they would feel more comfortable, I can probably drag up, and I haven't had somebody ask for one for quite a while, but I'm sure I have one somewhere that I can pull up, and if that would make them feel more comfortable. But I'm the only one that reads it. I mean, even the dean doesn't read it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure,
Last
it's a good
thing,
question.
the last thing is so we have an idea, me and Kelsey have an idea of obviously what our project is going to be based on for the company. But it might change, I think, once we do like the audit to see exactly where they, are having struggles or needs. So is that okay? Like if it's not initiated in our first.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And let me give you a couple of examples how it might change. You might do a waste audit and then realize, oh my God, the scope of that is too big. What I want to really focus in on is on paper waste. And so then you can just eliminate all the rest of it and just do a paper waste audit. As I say, it's an iterative process. So you just go back and revise anything earlier where you were talking about having a waste audit. Now, if you think that you're going to start with an energy audit and then decide later on that you're going to do a water audit, that's a pretty significant change because the theory that you're going to do next week is you're going to have what are the sustainability issues surrounding your project, and that's not the sustainability issues at the company, it's the sustainability issues globally, essentially. Why is this a problem? And so if you were doing energy and then switch to water, and you didn't do that until week 4, then you're going to have to go back and change, the introduction, the sustainability issues, because you're going to talk about water issues instead of energy issues. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense.
Mhm.
And for the project, whatever our suggestions are, if there's something, that they don't want to do and there's nothing that we can measure of them like doing better, like will that affect like the project as well?
Well, yes and no. I mean, obviously, it affects the project in some way, but it won't affect your final grade. You might not be terribly happy with the results. I had one team of 4 that did a goat farm, and it was so much fun. And they came up with 10 wonderful suggestions. And the owner thought that they were already doing a sustainable job and didn't like any of the suggestions. And they had 10 of them. So they picked 2 that were fairly innocuous that they could kind of do more or less offsite. And that's what they did. So and what will happen, what's supposed to happen is that you're going to come up with at least 3 recommendations. You're going to show them to the stakeholders, the key stakeholders, and say, this is, here's the cost benefit analysis of each one of those 3 recommendations. This one has the highest score, but this one is also good. What do you think would work well with you? And what fits into your culture, what fits into your budget? And they will tell you, well, this will be fine. no, we're not ready to do that one yet. And you use that for the rest of your paper. So you don't have to write up all 3 recommendations. You don't have to write up an implementation plan and a measurement plan and all of that for all 3 recommendations if they're not interested in them. So that's always a useful time to talk to your stakeholder, because that narrows down the rest of your paper. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
All righty. Anything else? Okay, well, I will stop recording now. And if you have any more questions, I'm available via email. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I'm sure some people are probably already, that are watching the video are already turning it off. One last thing, do not put in your first draft. Whatever you do, please do not put in your first draft. It's not going to be good enough. You need to edit and re-edit and re-edit. Allow time to edit still one more time. 4 to 5 edits. I edited my book 7 times and found a typo in the 7th one, and I was so annoyed because I had gone through it line by line 7 times. So at any rate, we want you to have a professional paper, and it's really obvious when you put in a first draft. And I will probably tell you that you don't want me to grade it. So be sure to edit. Now I think I'm ready to stop the recording. Okay, so